This tutorial is about bringing your narrative to life. It will focus on narration, description, and dialogue. And I'm reading this because, as you know, a narrative essay has a message or a point for the readers to take away once they finish reading. That message is one they can relate to and is communicated through a good story, vivid details, and reflection that reveals the significance of the experience. You need to remember to answer the questions, so what? Who cares? Getting your first car may have been really exciting for you, but is there anything of value in that story for the reader? If you can't answer those questions, then you should not write your narrative essay about that topic. Make sure that your readers can walk away with something of value that they can apply to their own lives. So, how do I tell a good story? Through structure, description, and dialogue. Without these elements, your story will be lifeless. If you don't grab them from the start, you're going to lose your reader. You need your reader to stick with you to hear your message and understand the significance of the story. How does that story go? Narrative structure. There are different ways that you can organize your story, and the structure can actually make it a lot more interesting for the reader. The first way you can tell your story is in chronological order from beginning to end, or even reverse chronological order, where you start at the end and then go back to the beginning. You can cover a long span of time, several years, for example, or you can cover a short span of time. All Over But the Shoutin' by Rick Bragg covers a couple hours. It's just a visit with his father. And yet that short span of time was really significant for him, and we, as the readers, gain a significant understanding of the lesson that he's trying to communicate. Similarly, Let It Snow spans an afternoon. The children are outside for a couple of hours or a few hours while their mother stays inside. And yet again, it communicates a very valuable message about family and sticking together. There are also snapshots. These are moments or events brought to life that are connected to each other. The Evil Eye by Wanda Coleman focuses on various experiences. They're not necessarily told in the order in which they occurred, but they all share a common theme. They are about Coleman and her husband dealing with conflict as a result of prejudice. So you can think of this as like several mini stories that are strung together because they all have something in common. And finally, there's flashback. So this can happen in a variety of ways, but basically it's flashing back and explaining a past event at some point in the narrative. Bragg does this a little bit with his father. He flashes back and thinks about what his father was like in the past, even though we don't actually see a scene between him and his father when he's younger. In Your Shoes, description. The language that you use to tell your story is important. Language has the power to put the reader in the story with you, to help the reader experience it as you did. Include essential details. Background information, specific names, places, dates, words that create a distinct tone. The reader needs to know when and where the story is taking place. The story should have a strong sense of place. Let It Snow and The Evil Eye are stories that both have a strong sense of place. Both authors evoke that sense of place through the language that they use to describe the setting. One story takes place in North Carolina, while the other one takes place in Los Angeles. And in both, we get a sense of how the setting affects the story. Without the snow day, we would never have a story. And the snow day was a big deal in North Carolina because they don't get a lot of snow. And Los Angeles is part of where the conflict comes from. There's so many different people of so many backgrounds, and we see the tension that brews because of those differences. Choose details of significance to you that evoke the sights, sounds, and other sensations that give meaning to your event. In The Evil Eye, Coleman uses vivid language to bring her experience alive. In the first snapshot, she describes the young man in the club who thumps her husband's shoulder and then, quote, stomps off to a dark corner. This vivid language is what brings the story to life, and it's what helps us, the readers, experience that tension as Coleman did. Create a dominant impression. The dominant impression is the overall feeling that the individual details add up to. In The Evil Eye, throughout the story, Coleman creates a dominant impression of tension, using words such as ugly glare, smirk, screech of rubber and scream of brakes, tongue lashing, and stared down. And these are just a few examples from the story. The deliberate word choice evokes these strong emotions of anger about to erupt at any moment, and it's because of that word choice that we get that sense of tension. As you're writing, pay attention to the types of words that you use. Vivid verbs bring the action to life. Adverbs describe verbs. They make the action more vivid for the reader. Do use these sparingly, though. And then adjectives describe nouns, the objects, people, or places around you. Now, just as an example, instead of writing he ran quickly, and quickly is an adverb, you can replace ran quickly with dashed, sprinted, or hurdled. What you want to do is use as many verbs as you can. Don't rely on the adjectives and adverbs. Make sure that you're picking vivid verbs that bring the story to life. Look who's talking, dialogue. Dialogue is a way of bringing in a voice other than your own, of showing people and scenes rather than just telling about them. Dialogue can have different purposes. One of the first purposes is to establish characters' relationships with each other. When you see the way that they talk to each other, you get a sense of what kind of relationship they have. It can also drive the narrative forward. We have dialogue that we understand is going to push the events in a forward motion and make something happen. And then dialogue can, of course, build suspense as well. When it comes to using dialogue, you do need to pay attention to how you punctuate that dialogue. Enclose each speaker's words in quotation marks and put end punctuation, periods, question marks, exclamation points, inside the closing quotation mark. For example, "Hey," we yelled, "open the door, it's us." You can see that the exclamation point is inside the quotation marks, and then the period at the very end of the sentence is also inside the quotation marks. Back and forth. When you are writing dialogue that includes more than one speaker, begin a new line each time the speaker changes. It can get really confusing for the reader if you have back-to-back quotes. For example, in Let It Snow, we have Gretchen, go lie in the street, and that's one speaker. And then we have Gretchen's response, make Amy do it, she said. Signal phrases. Sometimes you will need to use signal phrases to introduce or establish context for dialogue. I asked, she said, he exclaimed, they cheered, etc. In Let It Snow, we have the mother speaking. Get the hell out of my house, she said, and stay out, she shouted. You can see here that David Sedaris didn't use said both times. What you want to do is to avoid using says or said too many times. There's so many different verbs that you can choose from to capture not just what is being said, but the way the person is speaking. So make sure when you use signal phrases, you choose your verbs carefully.